What's going on, guys? Raymond here. I'm back with another video about React. So in today's video we'll be learning these. So we are going to look at JSX, ES6, the render method, components within components. We are going to look at functional components as well as class components. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started. So on my desktop here, I've created this folder here. Then I'm going to open this folder with a text editor. In my case, I'm using Visual Studio Code. Okay, so if you don't have this, go ahead and install Visual Studio Code. But for this to work, you need to also install Node.js. Okay, in my previous videos, I've talked about this, so you can go ahead and watch those videos and go ahead and create a React application and open it with Visual Studio Code. So the way I created this application is by running this command, which is npx create -react-app, then a dot, which means install that application within that folder. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this application just by saying npm start. Okay, then hit enter. So this is going to open up this application in the web browser, and it's just going to run all these folders here, and this is what is going to load. So to learn React, you can click here and it will take you to the docs where you can learn React, but sometimes the docs are not so clear because they go deeper, but the more you get to understand what React is, you're going to love the docs as well. Okay, so let's go back here. So what I'll do, I'll just come here in the public folder. Here we have got index.html. So this is where our application is being rendered. Let me just remove some of the comments that we do not need, because they make the application to seem complicated than it is. So I'll just remove these comments, and we just have a small index.html file. So go ahead and save that. So within that public folder, I'm just going to hold down Control and click on this icon and these two logos, right click, then delete. Make sure I read through, then move to recycle bin. Then I'm also going to this folder, which is the source folder. So I'll click on setup test.js, these report web vitals, and I also click on this app.js and the app.css, right click, then delete. Okay, make sure again you read through to make sure that you are deleting the right stuff. Okay, go ahead and delete those stuff. Okay, the application is going to break for a moment because we are trying to import some of the things that we have removed. Then you can just go to index.js, then remove these here. Then actually let's just remove everything, then save. So we are just going to remain with an empty index.js. So let's start from scratch. Okay, so React is just about components. So these components are just a piece of user interfaces which make up the whole website that we want to create. I think in the last video I talked a little bit about what components are, but here we are just going to do the practicals. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about components. Okay, so React have got two types of components. One which is the functional components, as well as the other one is the class component. Okay, so let's start with a functional component. So the way we do with that, first of all, we need to import React Then we also need to import the React DOM because we need those two things to run our application. So to import is just an ES6 syntax. So you need to be a little bit familiar with ES6 JavaScript, but I'll be explaining everything. So that's why I included ES6 so that you guys can understand. So to bring in something, we use import, which is an ES6 module, which we can use to import our modules. So we can say import React from React. So this is going to import all the React modules that we need. Then the other thing that we need to import is to import React DOM. React DOM. So here we are going to be having some suggestions. React DOM from React. Here it should be dash, then DOM, then /. Here we need to go with here you can see we have TypeScript client, we have JS client, so I'm just going to go with the JSX, the JS client. Okay, so we have imported what we needed. Now let's go ahead and start writing our application. So in Visual Studio Code, when you are writing your application, you are going to have a language down here which you are using. So in this case, .js means you're using JavaScript. So you can change, for instance, if you want Python, you see Python pop up. So we are using React, so I'll just write React there, then click on it. Then you are going to see that we have JavaScript React. Okay, so this will help us to even have some suggestions while we are typing out the code. Okay, so components, we'll start with functional components. So a component always is named using an uppercase. Every time we have to start writing a component, we have to use uppercase. So let's say this. So to define a function component, we just say function, then the name of our application. So we can just say my app. For example, you can name this as anything. Then within that curly parentheses, you can return. So what we return is known as JSX. We can put these parentheses when returning something, but we can also return just direct HTML. So this is not purely HTML. We return what is known as JSX. Okay, so JSX is just JavaScript XML. If you have come across this, I think in Java, when making some user interfaces, there is XML, that there is an option for XML that you can use. Okay, so there we are just going to return. If you're just returning maybe just one HTML like that, you can just return it like that. Then you can just say hello. Okay, so you can just write pure HTML here, but in most cases you are just going to put these parentheses first. Then here you need to wrap everything that you are returning in any HTML attribute or just a React fragment. So here you can wrap everything maybe in just empty these quotes, or you can put in a fragment. It doesn't really matter whatever you put there, as long as I would suggest you put in just JavaScript, HTML attributes. So you can just return a div there, for instance. Then this is important when writing functional components in the way that when you write something outside of this, you are going to have an error. Okay, so we will look at that. Everything should be wrapped within those. Okay, functional components are also known as stateless components, because back then there was no way to write state in the functional components, so they were called stateless components. But we are going to look at in the next videos that I'm going to create, we are going to see that these functional components now have got state by using state hooks, but those we are going to cover later in the video. Okay, so here you can return whatever you want to return. So let's just return maybe an H3. We just say welcome to React. Okay, then you can save this. Now here we have defined this, but we haven't used it, so we have a warning down there. So after we complete our component here, this is how we write this component. So the next thing is to render this component. So where are we going to render this component? To render this component, we'll be rendering it in this HTML boilerplate with a root and an ID of root. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so I'll just come down here. So I'm just going to create a variable here, which I'm going to say root is equal to. Now I need to call that react dot create root. This is just going to create just like in plain HTML and JavaScript, where we're just creating an HTML in JavaScript. So this is similar to that. So within that, we are going to return that particular app. So we return two things. I mean, we are going to call this to grab this ID of root. So let's go ahead and do that. So we are going to say document dot get element by ID, because it contains an ID. If it's a class name, it should be by class name. So get element by ID, then here you open up parentheses, then you put in the ID is root. Okay, then after that you just come down here, then you call that root dot render. So you can render method there. Then within that render method, you are again just going to render that particular app, which is my app. Okay, so close this, and now let's save this. Now when we go back, we should be able to, let's right click and inspect. Then we can go to the console, and we are going to see some things here. Create root is not a function, so let's check that. Okay, const root. Okay, we are having that error because here we need to call the const root is equal to react DOM dot create root. It should be uppercase. Okay, then here we should just remove these parentheses as well as this fragment, because we wrote fragment, so it was trying to import that fragment. Okay, so we should be good to go. Then we see successfully compiled by Webpack. So here we see welcome to React. Okay, so let me just close up this. So this is how we create and render our application. So we create a function, which is a function component, and after that then we render it like that. Okay, so this is a functional component. So now let's also look at how we can we can include another component. So let's say we want to include another component, so let's just say function. Oops. So function, so let's just call this as app. then we can just return some JSX here. Let me just return an H2. It just says hello, then save. Then how are we going to render this particular function? This is another component, so we can be creating our website just like this using components. This is the first component, this is another component, and we can just be going and going and going. Okay, so to render this component, we have two options. Say that we can put it here, or we can put it in this other component. It's going to work just fine. Now, if you want to put it in here, for instance, just include it as app, then you see you are going to have these red warnings here. Reason being because if you want to render this as well, we need to put these in angle brackets like that, or again you can just put a div around it. It will still work just fine. So I'll just go down there and include those angle brackets. Okay, now when we save, we are not going to have any errors, and when we go back, we are going to see we have this hello here. Or if we don't want to put this into that, we can as well render it into this component here. We can make this component to be the main component, and you can just go there, and within here you can just render it like that. So in most cases you can see we are successful, and when we go and check, still have hello. So in most cases we are not going to put more than one component here, but we are just going to put the component in one of these components, which we can make as the main component. Okay, so as you can see, maybe we can have more components just like this going. So this can be the main component, then we have got another component, then we have maybe another footer component when you are creating a website. So we can be going all the way and create our website just like this. Okay, but having just nested components in one file like this is not common. So the way we do things, we separate this, we create within this source folder. You can create just a folder here which you are going to call components. Then within that, this is where you can include the components. You can click there and putting a file. Again, when writing components, we always start with an uppercase. So my app.js, then hit enter. Then I'll just go back here and I'll just get this app here. I'll just cut that, and I'm going to render it here. Okay, so when you save, you should go back here and save, and you see you are going to see the app has crashed. Okay, so let's now go back here, and we need to export this particular component. So the way we do it is we just say export as default, then the name of that application, which is my app, just like that, then save, then go back to index.js, and in here you can import that particular component. So the way we import it, just like the way I've been importing, import my app, then from here it will just show the path of that component. Now in here we can just render it like that. Okay, so when we save, we are going to see we have a warning because we are just trying to, we are not yet using this component. So let me just save like that. Okay, search for the keywords to learn more webpack. So let's just check here. So app is not defined. Okay, so let's go back and check. So within here we are just writing this, so let me remove that as well. Okay, so now we have seen welcome to React. Okay, so this is how we separate our components, and you see now this is more cleaner. We won't be touching this file anymore. What we'll be doing is just writing those components somewhere else, and we just bring them there. Okay, and again, once we have this component here, instead of again we create another component inside here and we bring it here, we won't be touching this file. So what we'll do within that, let me just create this app now. So let me create that. So I'll just say app.js. Okay, then hit enter. Then I'm just going to remove these. Then I'll just get this here and cut it. Then I'll just bring it in the app here. Okay, then let me just remove these comments. Okay, so again we need to export this app. So just say export default, then that particular app, then save. Nothing is going to change. When we check, it won't be rendered because we are not importing it. Now instead of bringing it here again, we'll just put it in this app. So we can render it either on top there or just down here, whenever we want to render it. So we are just going to get that particular app. Okay, now when we bring it in there, we also need to import it. So we have to come on top there and we'll just say import app from app. Then once we save, now you're going to see we are successful and you just see hello. Okay, so that's how we separate just those components. Now we have created functional components. The other thing that I want us guys to look at is how we can create class components. Okay, now these are functional components which are just JSX. Yeah, this is how we create them. So let's go ahead and look at class components. But before we do that, let me just show you how we can create a functional component, or just an arrow functional component. This is not an arrow function. So the other syntax that we can use, instead of writing this like this, we can just say const. So const is just an ES6 syntax. So instead of saying var, we can use var. Then here we can call this app, then is equal to, then our function like that. This is just the syntax for the arrow function, instead of writing just the functions like that. So here we can do the same. We can return h3. Okay, can return h3, which just says hello. When we save, we are not going to see that because we are not exporting it. So let's export default, export default app, then let's save that. Then when we go back, now we are going to see hello. It still works the same, but with modern JavaScript, instead of that, we use const. Now when we save, let me just put this side by side so that we can see. So when we save this, we'll see nothing is going to change. We can also, if we are going to change the variable, but this is not right, though we can use late, but in most cases we are just going to use const. Okay, when we are defining a function, we can use late maybe for other things such as declaring data variables. Okay, so this is just an arrow function syntax which I wanted to show you guys. Okay, now the other thing that I'm going to show you guys is how we can use a class component, how it's structured. Okay, now in this episode, I just want to show you this because during the most companies, they do not move on quickly with the code. Just like if you create an application which is very large, and when something changes, the code will still be there. So most companies are still using classes, and it is a good practice just to know how the classes works. So within these components, I'm just going to create another function here. So I'll just call this let me just call this my func, okay, .js. Okay, now the way we create a class component is, let's import first React, then here I'll just put a comma there, then here I'll just say component. I hope that's the correct syntax. Then from React. Okay, then down here, let me just the way we initialize a class, we just say class, then the name of that particular class. So it will just be my func. Then here I'm just going to put extends. So extends, then here I'll just say React dot component. Then after that you open up curly parentheses like that. Let me just maximize this so that we can see. Then if you don't want to see this sidebar, you can just hold down Ctrl then B if you are on Windows to disappear. Okay, so within here we can define a constructor, which is a function like that, and within that we can just define a super keyword. And then after that you can super, then put these semicolons, and within that you can just define your state. Like I mentioned, the class components, they are not stateless, they always contain state when using React. Okay, so you can just say this dot state, so equals, here we initialize the state. So here you can put what you want your state variables to be. So you can, let's say we are looking for motor vehicles, so let me just say cars. So here I can define a cars variable. Maybe here I can just put in a BMW. Okay, now after we create our application like that and we define our data, in here we can pass in props, but we're not going to discuss props yet. So in here we are going to render this particular component, and we're just going to pass in the render method, and once we render that, we are just going to return JSX. I mean, we're just going to return HTML. Okay, so we can return a div here. Okay, so let me just return an h1, for instance. So to call that state, we can just put this parentheses. Then here we are just going to say this dot state, then dot that particular state variable. So we can just call that as a car. Then we can save this. Then here we can just export this again. We can just say export default. Export default. Then the name of my class, which is my func. Okay, so let's save this. Now once we save, we need to go ahead and import this. So I'll just open up this. Then where we are rendering our application is in this, so we can just import that. So we can import the name is my func from that. Then we can render now that particular application here. So we can just say my func. Okay, then when we save, so we see component is defined but never used. Okay, let's go and see that. Now we see, now we have BMW because that's the name of our car model, which is this one. Okay, so guys, I think this is a little bit enough for this next lesson. So we are going to see what we can do next. So see you in the next video, and thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure you subscribe for more content. Okay.